does an Avirah that's known to everyone. And until until he makes a Shubah, he goes back from his ways, he's a Rasha. And Torah says, hate. The loving Torah says, hate him. Next source, Hagod Mamoniyot, 3rd century Hachamim in Germany, coming on the Ram's Mizvah about the Mizvah to love every Jew like yourself. Comment source 7 says, V'davka shehu re'acha b'Torah mizvot, aval adam rasha she'enu mekabel tochecha mizvah l'sonato. Here we go again. You know we're talking about l're'acha? Surprise! We thought it was talking about every Jew. L're'acha kamocha. Love your fellow neighbor. Well, it's not, says Hagor Mamoniyot. It's talking about re'acha, someone that you could relate to and relate to you in Torah, in mizvot. Meaning, he's your partner in observing Torah. And if he's not a rasha that doesn't allow for improvement and correction, well, it's a mizvah once again to hate him. This is a little different than we've been taught from first grade. Mizvah to hate a Jew. The Hafetz Hayim in source 6 speaks about both Lashon Hara. He also speaks about Kav Zechut, benefit of the doubt. And he says in the first paragraph, and I'll paraphrase it, but you can read it to yourself. He says that someone that made an Averah knowingly many times, and it's known that this is a Averah, it's a terrible, severe sin. And this person, therefore, obviously is not doing it because he's overcome by his Yetzer Hara, because he keeps doing it. This person is doing it belligerently, rebelliously. He says at the end of that paragraph, this is the Hafetz Hayim, who's a great advocate, Lashon Hara, and taught all to speak never derogatorily, only this guy, to embarrass him, to speak derogatorily about this man. And the second paragraph, it says that basically you have a choice to judge him. Maybe in some situations you're in doubt. The kaf pova, the kaf zechut. He says in the first line of the second paragraph, sarich l'shofto l'sada hob. Without the opposite. You have to assume that he's doing wrong. Laws, Shulchan Aruch. What interest? Says Shulchan Aruch in the laws of interest, mumar, many definitions of mumar. Could be mumar, meaning rejecting one single mizvah from the Torah, or generally just out of the fold, not keeping Torah mizvot. Mutar lahavot b'ribit, you can charge him interest. No bets are off. Halakha 8, in general, Shulchan Aruch says, and mumar lahachis, someone who's doing averot, to anger God, to anger the community, belligerently, rebelliously, even one, or the more so for Avodah Zarah, or the more so as Mechalel Shabbat in public. He says at the end, Dino ke'oved kochavim. He's got the status of a goy. So here we are. We've just entered this category. This is our Torah. This is our God. This is our halacha. There are people in our nation called Mumar, called Rasha. All of a sudden, all bets are off. Halachot don't apply to some of them. You have to hate them. It's a mizvah to hate them. Sounds divisive. That's the Torah for you. That's a knowledge, reality. So if we pause over here for a moment, are we yet ready to discuss the Tel Aviv disco on Friday night? Are you ready for that yet? Some are saying, no, we're not going to take your answers now. Some eyes are saying yes. Few and I'm not sure about the live streamers, what they're thinking right now. But we're not going to address the Tel Aviv discoers yet on Shabbat. We're not going to address them yet. We need to go into another body of Jewish concept and Jewish law. And let's talk about, I wrote there, and we're at the bottom of page 3, the captive baby. In Hebrew, this is known as Tinok Shenishba. And that literally means that if you would have had a baby, we just mourn for in the Pinot, the Lamentations, we mourn for the fact that Jerusalem, when it was destroyed, many children were taken away from their parents and sold. That happened after the second Churban also by the Romans, Yamach Shemam. And obviously, children were separated from their parents in the Holocaust. It's happened tragically over our history. Tinok Shenishba would be a child baby taken away and grown up in a different foreign environment and community. Literally, the baby captive. The first source 9, it's based on the Mishnah Masechet Shabbat, speaks about someone who does not know or forgot, who's not knowledgeable about the concept of Shabbat, and he's doing melachot for years and years and years and years, and then someone tells him about, does he bring like 1,000 or 100,000 korbanot? The answer is no. He brings one because of forgetfulness of Shabbat. So the Beraita wants to know, who's this person we're talking about? The Beraita says, second line, Kesad, Tinok Shenishma ben Hanochim. Simple. It is a child, a baby who's been captive and grown up and brought up, and this person knows of nothing. So that is the classic Tinok Shenishba, the captive baby. So let's talk about it. I brought here contemporary 20th and 21st century poskim without being specific and applying which exact Jews we're talking about. In general, how do we look at this captive baby? How do we look at the general Jew who's brought up with no background and no influences? How do we look at such a baby, such a person, such a Jew? Source 10, we'll go through them quickly. Tisha Eliezer, Rabbi Eliezer Waldenberg, one of the great poskim of the 21st century, 20th century rather, famous set of books, passed away recently. And he was going back and forth with another Hacham, and I'm only going to read the underlined part of the source. And he's talking about a Tinok Shenishba, a child brought up in a foreign environment. And he says, Hare ki Yehudi kasherhu. He, for lack of a better term, is a kosher Jew. Everything, including even thinking he's a goy, doesn't believe, he won't acknowledge that he's a Jew. They're considered as non-averot. Let me repeat that again. This child, adult real Jew, his mother's Jewish, spends his life in whatever else he's doing, and we are solving him. We are laying no guilt on him. It's as if he's made no averot because it's completely something out of his control and against his will. The fact that he has no background. Tisha Eliezer, 20th century posek, is about a few more sources. The next page, page 4 on top, speaking about the Chokhmat Adam, is actually an 18th and 19th century famous Ashkenazi posek halacha, and he speaks about Aval tinok shenishba ben hagoyim ve'eno yadei mitorah Yisrael kelau. Someone brought up among the goyim who does not know of our Torah. Elo din mumar kelau. He's not what we were speaking about when we spoke about Rasha or Mumar, and a Jew that's rebelled against and left the fold. You can't make any avirot with him. That's mizvah to sustain him and to bring him in. And finally, Rabbi Shmuel Wozner, famous Shevet HaLevi, the student of the Hazon Ish, passed away only years ago, lived to 100. One of the great Ashkenazi poskim of the 20th, of course, and 21st century. And he speaks about also a Tinok Shenishba. And he says that, you know what? When you're talking about Mumad, that's only someone that has knowledge and should know better. But, what are you going to do with someone who learned from no one? Saw nothing in terms of influences, in terms of education and background. He was corrupted by his upbringing. What are you going to do with such a person? Absolutely not. He is not the mumad we're talking about. He is not the one that's permissible to treat him any less than a regular Jew, says Rabbi Wozner. And let's flow in now to more specifics. Let's talk about certain labels that we give to Jews. Let's go all the way back to the second Bet HaMikdash. You learned in history, Sidukim by Tusim. right? The Reformed Jews of today, Siddukim, except they were very antagonistic, if you know the history, towards the observant Jews. And they were very powerful at one point, even getting appointments to the Kehunah Gedolah, these Siddukim. Let's look at the Kara'im in the later centuries, the Middle Ages. Those who denied, like the Siddukim, Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral law. Let's talk about today's secular Jews, these Chilonim, 49% of Israel. Let's talk about the Reformed Jews, shall we? Let's read the sources. And let's see, indeed, are they Tinok Shenishba? Are they or are they not the equivalent of the baby captive? Here we go. First, we start with the Rambam. The Rambam, amazingly, is going to allude to the Kara'im. And we'll start from the underline. This is a critical watershed halacha by the Rambam that opens the doors for poskim for many generations. The wayward Jews, and this is what I labeled this. And the generations that follow, whose fathers and leaders misled them. And they were born among these Kara'im. This sect of Jews who were really a plague among the Jewish people for centuries and don't believe in the oral law, antagonized us. And they grew up amongst them and were taught in that educational mode. This is like the child baby captive who grew up among them. He never had a choice. He never had an option to keep Torah and Mitzvot. It was all against his will. And the Rambam ends with saying, not just he's not a Rasha. Reach out to them. He's talking about Kara'im. He's talking about people that were antagonized, that were Hachamim for generations. And the Rambam is saying, reach out to them to bring them back from Tshuva, l'moshcham b'deresh shalom, peacefully. Get them back to our way of Torah Mitzvot. Groundbreaking. And that's followed by groundbreaking Piskei Halacha by our powerful poskim in the modern times, in the past century. The Hazon Ish, Rabbi Kurlitz. Fair to say, after the death of the Havetz Chaim, the most authoritative Ashkenazi posek of the world in the 20th century. Possibly. The Hazon Ish dealt with the question of Mumad and secular Jew a number of times. And he spoke about the fact that Tinok Shenishba is a Jew, and we have to take care of him. And we spoke about the fact that we're responsible for him, and he quoted Ahavat Chesed Hafetz Hayim. And he said, the Mizvah le'hoved harsha'im mahai ta'ama. Let me say that nice and slow for Rosh Yeshiva graduates. Mizvah le'hob et harsha'im mahai ta'ama. That means that all the Risha'im, the evildoers that we listed, that we spoke about, la halacha, in the early sources, the Hazon Ish now turns it on its face. And he said that if someone's categorized as Tinok Shenishba, and I'll tell you who he does categorize as that in a moment, as the captive baby, it's a mizvah. He's still a Rasha in that. He's doing certain avirot that might categorize him as a Rasha. It's a mizvah to love him, he says. It's all against their will. It's all beyond their control. And in brackets there, I brought a quote of one. There are many Hachamim that speak about the fact that the Hazon Ish, many ways, many times, verbally and in writing, perhaps in letters, spoke about the Hilonim, the secular Jews of our time, that 49% currently in the state of Israel, as those categorized as Tinok Shenishba. Some don't like it. This is the Hazon Ish, as the captive baby, as the one that we put no guilt on. The Hazon Ish passed away in 1953. 1953. Belarus is where he lived most of his life, but in the last 20 years of his life in Eretz Yisrael, and that's where he died. Let's go to Rav Moshe Feinstein, if you weren't in love with the Hazon Ish. Rav Moshe Feinstein, Igerot Moshe. And he speaks about, Rav Moshe Feinstein dealt with a lot of these issues. And he speaks about Siddukim. There are no Siddukim today. Who is Rav Moshe Feinstein speaking about? He didn't tell us. But he said that which they're not shomer Torah and don't believe in Torah shebe'al peh, it's because of their leaders. And their leaders misled them. But look at the underline, gentlemen. Aval hadorot ha'acharonim shehe'eminu lahem hem shogegim. But the recent generations that believe them, who do you think he's talking about? The recent generations that bought into their movement, they're without knowledge. If they knew how wrong they were, even the oral law they'd be engaging in. I don't know. There are no Sudukim today. There's a small movement of Karaim still exists in Israel, maybe a few hundred. Is he speaking about the olden days of Moshe? And he goes on. And he says, regarding a Tanoch Shenishba, the logic behind why we treat the baby captive so easy, so innocently. And he says in the underline in the second paragraph in source 15, in his heart, a Jew wants to be a Jew. Someone with a Jewish soul, a child of Abraham Avinu and Sarai Menu, want to be a Jew. He has no real, there is no real position to be against Judaism for someone who had no background. Rather, he just doesn't know, says Rav Moshe. Turn the page. We're going close to the home stretch, but we're just getting started. In source 5, page 5, source 16, the Shevet HaLevi, Rabbi Busner again. He says, how do you define Tinok Shenishba in our days? He says simply, and I'll paraphrase it in English. You were born to parents who were away from the fold, out of the fold of Judaism, and he had no choice. And also someone who grew up among Goyim without a wholesome surrounding of Torah and Mizbot, never heard, was never educated. That's a Tinok Shenishba. He just brought in the category that Rabbi Versner. He said that anyone brought up in these surroundings without a proper education, without a proper surrounding, without parents to guide him, this is who we're talking about when we say Tinok Shenishba. Yakut Yosef, Hacham Yishak Yosef, the current chief rabbi of Israel, he gets right to it. Chilonim, he's surrounded by them. The secular Jews, Shebizman Hazeh, yes, L'rubam, most of them, Tikulam, vast majority of them, Din Shel Tinok Shenishba Ben Hagoyim. Even the Mehalel Shabbat, Befar Hesyah, even though they're in the discotheque on Friday night, and they're driving in the car, honking their horn at you, they're Tinok Shenishba. And his brother Hacham David Yosef as well says Mehalel Shabbat in public in our generation doesn't know better, didn't learn properly. If that's the case, and if you had to include him in Minyan, you can. And finally, Rabbi Klein, Hacham Yosef once told me when I asked Hacham a question, he told me, go ask Rabbi Klein. He knows best on this. Rabbi lives in Borough Park, died in 2011. On Reformed Jews, he spoke about, you know what? Their leaders are to blame. This is a long teshubah that he had, long responsa. Last underline in source 19, Aval HaHamon, most of the Reformed Jewry, She'enam Yud'im Ben Yiminam V'Smolam, do not know to differentiate between the right and left. They know nothing. Tinok Shenishba, he said. We don't blame them. We absolve them. They're not the Sha'im. They're your fellow Jew, and you love them. Now, to be fair, secular Jews in Israel is a controversy. And there are different poskim on both sides. Rabbi Al-Yashiv, Alav Shalom, doesn't say that they are like Tinok Shenishba. But, by and large, gentlemen, I think we're able to answer some of our questions. What's our attitude? Our attitude. The halakha has already spoken. Our attitude to these people, to the secular, to the reform, to the vast majority of them, according to the vast majority of poskim, no hate. Love. Are they our source of mourning? Obviously, it's tragic. The gay parade is tragic. The disco on Friday night is tragic. The Jew eating a cheeseburger is tragic. Driving his car on Shabbat is tragic. Obviously, it sickens us. It's a void. It's a void of holiness. It's a void of godliness in this world. It's a void of our way of Torah. It's our way of life. It's an affront to everything we believe in. Obviously, it's tragic to us. But we blame? Do we point the finger? Do we attribute tragedy to them? How can we? The Torah absolves them. And I want to address those who I've heard. I'm not meaning to be divisive and chas v'shalom, point fingers at someone specific and be derogatory, but in general, those who I've heard point fingers at the Reformed Jew and the movement in general in these days, besides their leaders who may be evil, and point fingers to the secular Jew and say, aha, our Chorban, our destruction, our tragedies. I'll talk to that Jew for a second, Mr. Frum. I want to talk to Mr. Religious. What makes you think? What makes you think that if you grew up with his parents, if you grew up in her environment, if you did not have your education, rather you had his secular education, if all you knew about is what he knew about, what makes you think, Mr. Observant Religious Frum, that you'd be any different? And if he had your upbringing and your parents and your community and your yeshiva and your surroundings and your opportunities, who says he wouldn't be as good or better than you? Who says? No one's to say. And I'll tell you something else. I know it angers us when we see these things. It peeves us, and it should. It sickens us. But the Torah places blame on the reality of it, not on the person himself. The reality is a tragedy. The reality should sicken us. The numbers, the percentages, they're over 80% is crazy. But it's that truism. It's that reality in our Jewish world. It's not them. It's not the people themselves. Because he could have been you and you could have been him. And don't forget that. So, I think that we're about ready to answer the question, then where is the finger pointed? And we're about ready to hear from Rabbi Weinberg. Rabbi Noah Weinberg is nothing short of one of the great Renaissance men of the 20th century. The founder of Eshat Torah. He broke open and basically opened the doors in our lifetimes of people like that coming back to the fold. He inspired many, many movements in a generation that's now coming back to Teshuvah. He broke through unbelievably. We're about to see a very brief clip from Rabbi Weinberg. He made it on Shavuot, but it's really a general theme, and the theme is so appropriate. He's very strong, and he seems very harsh, but hold on to your seats, because I think he hits a point that's so critical and crucial that we all need to hear. Jack, take it away. Right, loud. 1 second, start again. There's so much you can get from that video, but I think there's two critical points that we're obligated to walk away from. Number one, he pointed a finger if you weren't paying attention. The brotherhood of mankind, that's all of mankind, but first, the brotherhood of Jews. And the brotherhood of Jews, but first, the brotherhood of those who believe in the instructions and marching orders. Do you know who that is? That's Jews that believe in the right way of life, even though they don't practice it. And the brotherhood of those who believe in the instructions and marching orders that God gave us, but first, the brotherhood of the soldiers undertook to do it. Do you know who that is? That's the 17%. That's us. The brotherhood of those who undertook the cause of God. You want to save the Jewish people? You want to save humanity? You need the brotherhood of those who not only believe, but are dedicating their lives to Torah and Mitzvot. You need their brotherhood, or else everything else is absolutely worthless. And the second point is that we can't do it alone. We need to stop this. We need to stop thinking that it's not just Rabbi Levavitz, they're great. It's not just the brothers, they're great. It's not just the Haladim, we're great. It's not just the Matalon, they're fantastic. It's not. It's not. It can't happen unless the 17% get together. It won't happen. Here's a guarantee. Take it to the bank and talk to me during Mashiach. Mashiach will not come. Will not come. It is not coming. Unless the 17% get together. Not happening. So continue to be divisive, continue to cheer on your cause, continue to wait for yourself to be right, be vindicated. It's not happening. It's not happening. The 17% have to get together. Whatever. Okay. If you make that choice for you, you can't ignore it. So who takes the blame? Obviously. And then you pull no punches. I just quoted a few to you. We are talking about the Kohanim, to say Torah, he's not talking about the secular reform. Or they could be movements. Let's go no further with Shaya, speaking about who? The from Jews. I want to put my home, I want to back. I want that, but something else from the exactly Rabbi Weinberg was addressing. The brotherhood of those who undertake to fulfill the instructions and marching orders of God. That's true. And that's what we need to get together. And how do we get this thing turned around? I'll tell you. You're worried about the disco Friday night television. You're worried about events and Torah and patent. 2048. Worried about Shabbat. I am also. But I got to tell you that we, Jewish people, we observe Jewish people. We can come together. We could unite. We have enough cumulative talent, knowledge, resourcefulness amongst all of us, brilliance, skill, spirit, drive, and will to solve the other over 80% like that. In no time, like the speaker, did he eat the different that speed will go into effect. We'll hit that gas pedal when we get together. You'll see the little radius coming together. Listen, the reality is a problem. You're bothered by it. We have to know that they are not the problem. The problem is that it exists. To get rid of it, take the people that are conscious, take the people that know it, take the people that understand God and this is what happens. The over 80% can be transformed, but we have to first transform ourselves. It comes down to the same central issue. Not the shalom. What's it going to be? We hold the cards. There's no one else to blame. The next meeting. That's a shame. That's about it. I think what we're going to do is I have Rabbi Eisenstadt now on Zoom and he's here. Maybe we'll just go directly into his class because it's already almost at 45. We have a video after Rabbi Eisenstadt's class, a very nice video. Okay. So let's do that. Rabbi, please unmute yourself.
Jack, we're going now with Rabbi Sachs, right?
Rabbi. There he is. Hi, Rabbi. I hear you.
I can
Rabbi?
understand that.
Okay, we're ready for you.
Jack, go with Rabbi Sachs now.
Rabbi Sachs now?
Yes.
Okay. You were short. Yeah. Somebody look at my WhatsApp. Daniel.
You have it?
Bobby, can you go see if Esteban is there? If he could bring me the amp, the speaker, the big speaker.
You send it to me, no? I have it in the WhatsApp. I can put.
Okay, wait. Screen. Okay. So here we go. Starting the video with Rabbi Sachs.
Share screen.
Okay, Rabbi, please mute.